I'm a journalist here at Inside Edition.
Zara Lakhshan was assigned to go undercover at 12 Tribes, a religious sect, to investigate claims of child abuse and child labor.
My goal was to appear as a person who was a little bit lost in the world. I was there to see the fall foliage, and I was just there to learn about this really interesting group of people.
Zara spent several days on their farm going by the name Rebecca.
And I thought for sure I would slip up in one of the dozens of times I was introduced. I would say, "Hi, I'm Zara." And I don't know what I would have done in that situation. There's really no way to explain forgetting your own name. So that was a bit terrifying. What was going through my mind at all times was, is my camera on? Is it recording? Are my wires exposed?
While on the 12 Tribes property, she offered to work in the muddy fields.
My dad said put one there and one there.
Okay. Seeing the kids working in the farm was heartbreaking because I was there right alongside them. I was talking to them. I was doing the work with them, and I couldn't stop it. These kids said to me directly, "I do everything on the farm."
When it came time to say goodbye to the community, Lakhshan's exit went smoothly.
Hey everyone, welcome to Thought Crime and Keto and Crime. Today we've got another episode of Cult Watch. Today we're going to check out the 12 Tribes cult. Let's get into it. The 12 Tribes cult, also known as the Yellow Delhi people, Yellow Delhi cult, or the community, is widespread. It's in North America, South America, Australia, and Western Europe. It was actually created in 1972 by a former high school guidance counselor by the name of Jeanne Sprigs. His adopted Hebrew name, because when you get into this cult, they give you a Hebrew name, was Yonik. And he started this 1972, Chattanooga, Tennessee, very near where I grew up in extreme northeast Alabama. And it has approximately 3,000 people as members worldwide. Jeanne Sprigs was born May 18th, 1937, near Chattanooga, Tennessee. He went on to actually go to college, which was very unusual for that period of time in the United States. It was right in the height of the Great Depression, but he did go on to get an education degree and eventually became a high school guidance counselor. He and his wife, Marcia, started what they called the Light Brigade. Just prior to 1972, it was a youth outreach, a youth ministry that he and his wife created to kind of bridge the tide between the generations. They really wanted to bring children into the fold. They were devout Christians, so they started it as a youth outreach. And it grew. It grew to several hundred members in and around Chattanooga, Tennessee, and as a result, they needed a church home. So they went to the historical First Presbyterian Church in Chattanooga. If you look up the First Presbyterian Church in Chattanooga, you'll see it has a very rich history. It's one of those historical churches, whether you're religious or not, you really owe it to yourself to go see. So definitely check that out. They actually became members of that church. They held their meetings within that church. And for the time, in the early 70s, they broke a lot of social mores. This was deep south in the 70s, not that far after the civil rights movement. There was not a whole lot of voluntary integration going on in non-government facilities, namely churches. So the Light Brigade would actually bring in members that were of poor socioeconomic status, because the people that went to First Presbyterian were very solidly middle class to upper middle class to wealthy. So they would bring in people that weren't wealthy, people that were very much blue collar, people that were very working class to poor. They would also bring in members of other races and ethnic origins. They brought in blacks, Hispanics, what have you. Asians, and that really broke the social norms, and they came into a lot of dispute with the higher management, for lack of a better term, of the First Presbyterian Church, and they got into some squabbles, though they still kept their home base there at First Presbyterian. However, January 12th, 1975, Jeanne, his wife, and their little congregation came to church as normal on that Sunday, only to find it closed for the Super Bowl. They closed church for the Super Bowl. He wasn't having that. He was very much of a fundamentalist mindset that's God's law above all others. Why are you closing church for a man-made game? So that was the final straw for him. He immediately cut all ties with First Presbyterian Church and started his own church, the Vine Christian Community Church, in a local building there in Chattanooga. From that time, his group, because of the rumors of how open and welcoming it seemed to be, and remember that, seemed to be, it branched out, and he went into well over 1,000 members and branched out to other smaller to medium-sized southern towns around the area. He established community churches in Dalton and Trenton, Georgia, Mentone, Alabama. I actually went to Baptist Bible Camp in Mentone, Alabama every summer as a kid, so I know that area well. It's a very unique little historical community in extreme North Alabama, so that hits home, and Dayton, Tennessee. So he started branching off, the Vine Church started branching off into lots of communities. Now, when he first started the church, he basically broke down a lot of barriers. He believed, Jeanne Sprigs believed, that everyone was capable of being a minister. Everybody that was called to be a Christian could actually preach. And he didn't think you needed an intermediary to go between yourself and God. So he didn't really consider himself clergy. He didn't consider his wife clergy. He didn't appoint anyone else among the congregation as clergy. They were all equal. And for a long time, that was the norm. But as you got closer to the 1980s, he began to change it up a little bit. I believe he saw the power that being the head of a religious organization can bring you. It's just like Jim Jones. And I'll cover Jim Jones at some point. Jim Jones started out doing a lot of good for a lot of people. And then he saw the power that comes with that, and so he did a flip in his head and kind of became power hungry. I believe that's what happened to Jeanne Sprigs. He showed that by using God, the personification of God, he could control these people, which is like a lot of cults do. At this point, around 1977-78, is when I think the Light Brigade, Vine Christian Community Church, made the flip from an interdenominational church to an actual cult that we know today as the 12 Tribes. Now, he started calling himself a prophet. He started appointing a hierarchy within the community church, and he started writing what he believed or what he said were inspirations from God himself about how people should conduct their lives and how the church should operate. So he started these writings, and people, there were some things you would never see until you reached a certain rank in the church. So that sounds a lot like Scientology, where certain things are withheld until you're at a certain level. So it was now the church started becoming a cult. Now let's get into what the cult believes, apart from what the old church actually believed. As we got closer to 1980, the church started having a lot of rumors of child abuse, mass racism, and homophobia. And I bet you're like, Tracy, but they were an open church. They let everyone in. Yeah, they did. But then they made that flip to cult. And as a lot of cult members do, they realize, and for those of you watching on video, that is Mr. Spriggs right there. I believe that's his wife, Marcia. I couldn't find any definitive information that that's Marcia, but I believe that's who it is. They began to put out a different sort of propaganda to control people. Remember when we went over the snake handling Pentecostals? The things that you look for in a cult, do they control your very personal lives? Yes, they did. Do they isolate you from other people? Yes, that was starting. And let's get into how that happened. Along this time, they started to organize themselves into communes. So instead of a person living at home and going to church and living their everyday lives outside of church, they started forming communes in these cities where they had their churches, and people were living a communal life, which in the 70s, that was very popular. The hippie movement was still very much in flow, so it wasn't anything unusual to have a commune. They started possessing the people's paychecks. They started taking all their paychecks. All the work they did went for the benefit of the church. And this is when they started doing the yellow delis. Google yellow deli. I bet you can find one within a 100-mile radius of you. Or a yellow deli food truck. These are delis that are very inexpensive. The food's pretty good from what I understand. And it is run by the 12 Tribes cult. And this is how they bring people in. They will offer people a free meal, sit down, talk to them about their beliefs, and kind of try to bring them in. And it is members of the cult that operate these things, but only if you're at a certain rank, because for the most part, they keep everybody isolated on these communes, and all the work that happens on those communes. So they try to recruit people that are tradespeople that have a specialized skill that can do things for the good of the commune. And only people that are well indoctrinated get to go out and work in these delis and these food trucks. So everybody works for the good of the commune. It's very regimented. And when I talk about racism and homophobia, yes, at first they were very open, but it's to a degree. They teach that people that are not white, the only way they can attain salvation and get to heaven is to submit to white people. That's literally a teaching that was written in some of Sprigs' very first work. They will deny it to this day by saying, we have black members, but that's the equivalent of saying I have black friends, to say you're not racist. Yes, they welcome everyone in, but there is very definitely a social pecking order with white people at the top. Now, let's get into them leaving Chattanooga. By 1980, you had a lot of high-powered people in Chattanooga that just didn't like them. They were starting to realize they were a cult. There was a lot of people that were being sucked in there, basically deprogrammed against their families, to leave their families and put the cult above their families. So a lot of people, as you can imagine, did not like them. And there was a massive deprogramming effort that was put forth by a former Chattanooga police officer, mainly to get his own daughter out, that started to happen. People were literally being kidnapped from the communes by their families and friends, drugged back, and basically put through a forced deprogramming to get them back into life. Well, to avoid all of that, and the fact they were also very deeply in debt from a lot of their delis that they had opened up, basically they closed up shop in the South. And they moved to Vermont, and they were welcomed in certain areas of Vermont, because Vermont, New Hampshire, those areas aren't super populated. So anything that's going to bring people in, that's a good thing. And so they were welcome into these areas. And because old New England has a very don't tread on me type of philosophy, very libertarian type philosophy, no one bothered them that much. So they were able to move and really flourish in New England. And from Vermont, they started to branch out into Canada, and then into Europe and Australia, as well as all over the USA. And they eventually, by 2008, were back with a commune in their home city of Chattanooga, Tennessee. So that's the history. Now let's get into their actual beliefs. Sprigs and his followers believe in the 3 eternal destinies. That is, every person is given at the fall a conscience. Everybody knows right from wrong. They don't necessarily believe in an age of accountability. They believe you're born in sin, you know the difference between right and wrong. That goes against a lot of traditional church teachings. They believe that every person, regardless is not even a word, regardless of their faith goes into a state of death. You die and you're held in a sort of limbo, kind of akin to Hades in the Greek religion or purgatory from Catholic religion. But you're held into a state of limbo, deep sleep after you die. And then everyone is awakened upon the second coming of Christ. At that final trump, everybody rises and you live with Yeshua or Jesus during his 1,000-year reign of peace. For those of you that aren't unaware, in the Christian tradition, there's a lot of conflict about what happens at the end of the world in the Christian religion, but for the most part, evangelicals, and they are evangelical, believe that Jesus will, they're divided on whether or not there's a rapture where everybody that believes in Jesus will be taken up during the tribulation, but at the end of that tribulation, a period of 7 years of suffering, if you didn't believe in Jesus, there is the second coming of Christ, where Christ comes back and reigns for 1,000 years on the earth. Great peace, great prosperity. This is where you hear the things about the lion lays down with the lamb, that kind of thing. Well, they believe everybody will be resurrected, so instead of going through a tribulation, everybody will die at the second trump. Everybody will be resurrected, and you will live for 1,000 years on earth with Jesus in great peace and prosperity, and then you will face the final judgment where you are either rewarded or punished based on how you conducted yourself in life. So that's what they believe. They believe that they are the extension of the original 12 tribes of Israel. Those of you that don't know, according to Abrahamic religion, Abraham, the father of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, had sons. There's a great dispute on how many sons. Some believe he had 4. Some believe he had 2, 3. It goes on and on. But in the Christian, Judeo-Christian tradition, it was 2. Ishmael was the oldest. That was the son of Abraham and his concubine. And Ishmael was banished into the desert, and God raised him up as a great nation as well. And he was the father of the Islamic, or the Muslim people, or the Islamic religion. Then you have Isaac, who's the most well-known of the sons, the younger son, who actually receives all the blessings of God and becomes the father of the Jewish people and eventually the Christian people as well. So Isaac had 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. Jacob had 12 sons, which would become the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. Jacob would later be renamed Israel, which is God's chosen people, and his 12 sons would be the 12 tribes of Egypt. So all Jewish people are part of one of the 12 tribes, and they are Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. And they all have different jobs for the kingdom of Israel. The Levites were the lawgivers and the priests. Judah were the soldiers. Joseph were the wise men. Benjamin and Asher were farmers. It just depends on what tribe you are as to what your preferred profession should be. Well, they believe they are a literal personification of those 12 tribes of Israel. All of their communes are named after one of the 12 tribes of Israel, and that's what that commune does in theory. So they go out, they create these communes. Everybody does for the good of the communes. They put all the money into opening their delis and their buses to bring in more people, and then they also recruit tradesmen to come in to better serve the commune. Within those communes, yes, there are people of all races, but most of the non-white races are considered subservient to the white man. They believe that we did Africans a great service by bringing them to this country as slaves, and that's the only way they're going to be saved, is to submit themselves to the white man. They definitely believe all homosexuals should be killed. If someone is found to be a homosexual among them, they are either excommunicated or tortured. And there have been a lot of investigations in Western Europe, which found a lot of abuse of suspected homosexuals and children that have been widely disputed by the higher leadership of the 12 tribes, but it has been caught on film. I mean, they are masters of gaslighting. They also rely a lot on child labor because all of their schooling is done in a homeschool situation or a commune school situation, so they usually bring children out of school a lot earlier than mainstream society would, and they put them to working in a trade that is beneficial to the commune. So there's been a lot of scrutiny about using child labor. In fact, the company Estee Lauder, the cosmetics company, had contracted with some of these communes to make some of their cosmetics. And when they went to inspect, they found very young children working 12, 14 hours a day, and they shut off all proximity with these communes. So there's a lot of abuses of children. Women are considered property. Let me break it down. If you're married when you go into these communes, not only do they change your name, everybody that goes into these communes receive a Hebrew name, but they can dissolve your marriage and remarry you to another person based on the needs of the community. You are encouraged to have at least 7 children. Birth control is forbidden. And in most cases, regular medical care is forbidden. It's kind of a crude amalgamation of Seventh-day Adventist, Christian Science, that kind of thing. They're very afraid of modern medicine. Also, women are property that can be used by anyone in the commune as long as it's with the permission of an elder. Let me break it down there. Let me break it down for you. That cooter is communal property. Just let that sink in. Yeah. As far as children, not only are they forced to work, corporal punishment is the standard. In fact, Sprigs wrote in some of his books on child rearing that a daily beating is good for a child. And they believe that within the book of Revelation, where it talks about the number of Jews that will go to heaven, there's 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. That equals 144,000. You've heard that number, and you've probably heard it in reference to Jehovah's Witnesses. They believe it is their responsibility to rear 144,000 men that can literally breathe fire from their mouths, because it says in those verses they will breathe fire. They believe that if they are pure enough and strict enough, they can actually raise 144,000 boys that will actually be able to shoot fire from their mouths. And Jesus will come once they have raised that 144,000. With 3,000 members worldwide, good luck. And like I said, it's just amazing what they believe and how people get themselves sucked in. But I can see how in the 70s, this kind of communal living type cult could be very attractive. I mean, at first, I think maybe just like a lot of cult leaders, like we said before, believed they were doing some good until they weren't. So beware of those yellow delis. Beware of those yellow deli food trucks. Get your sandwiches elsewhere. And keep away from cults, y'all, because they're bad. I hope you've enjoyed this. I'll be back soon. Like, comment, share, subscribe. If you have a few dollars you can spare, definitely give me a tip below. Cash Out, PayPal is below. It helps the channel since I'm heavily demonetized. Even if you don't, just like, watch, share. That's all I ask. Thanks, guys, so much. Keto Comic. Out.